Hello, this is Michael Hexter, and welcome to Politics 2100 here on YouTube. So, this episode I'm calling The Paradox of High or Low Social Status in Old and New Fascism. So, this is a continuation of the series about the nature of fascism and why it's hard to understand and grasp, and why that actually is also a political benefit for fascists. In other words, for the in terms of being able to confuse their and disorganize their opponents. So in any case, this is a continuation also of the idea that there is a paradox, or simultaneously there are two states of mind that are alternated between in fascism. In other words, there's a sense of being a victim and also victimizing other people, using that as an outlet, you could say, or for a sense of being a victim, of being powerless, of being low status. So I'm using the word low status and high status in a way that's maybe unusual in political theory and in sort of social analysis. I mean, it depends on which school you're in and so forth and so on. But I'm not talking about social class. Social class is different than social status. They're closely related, but they're not exactly the same thing. So, and in a way, also, it's something that you if you ever take a class in improv comedy, actually, social status is one of the ways that you adopt a certain role in relationship to other people in an improv situation. So, I mean, I took a few classes in improv at one point many years ago. But anyway, but social status is something that people are concerned about all the time. They think about it. They attempt to sometimes to appear of a different social status than they are, or they feel like other people view them as, so forth and so on. They're trying to be, better themselves, quote unquote. But anyway, particularly in fascism, I think social status is it's hard to locate whether fascists are high or low. So I'm using these words in a very primitive, emotional level, in terms of whether you look down on them or you look up to them. And also, it's something that in the actual ideology and in the political psychology of fascism, it's very, very important, in that fascists endow one person with, or maybe at the most one person and their allies or their council, so to speak, with all of the power and status in society. They elevate that person to a very, very high status, so high that, in fact, anything they do, like we're thinking about Donald Trump, for instance, that can be folded into this idea that they have an infinitely high status or extremely high status, and the people who are the hangers on to the or the base, or the followers of this strong man, usually, or conceivably it could be a woman, but mostly it's a man, and that they gain protection, but also elevated status because of their being a part of that movement. And also, that maps closely onto race. Well, why racism is so important is racism is a management, is a way that people manage their perception of their own social status by projecting outward, by their negative feelings about their own social status onto other people, that they try to create a hierarchy in their minds where they belong to the higher group, or and they are constantly trying to reinforce that through racist activities, by involvement in racist discourse of various kinds. And in the United States also, I'm speaking to people who I imagine are not part of that group, but there are people who who think, well, they're not being racist, that somehow racism has become a little bit of a stigma even among those people. In other words, the word racism, even though the actions or the attitudes themselves are often or mostly racist on the far right in the United States and in other countries as well. So anyway, so there's this management of the sense of social status. You could say also, some anthropologists talk about purity and danger, and the idea that they are purifying themselves to gain a higher social status, and in their minds to involve themselves in activities that will elevate themselves over other people, to look down on other people. So there's a very visceral way in which this concept of social status, I think, interacts with people's thinking, and also psychology, and also how they interact with other people, so forth and so on, and whether they should defer to other people, or whether they should tell other people who they are, to identify them, to say, you're this person, and that is something that is about social status, and is about you could say also Adler, the German psychoanalyst, heterodox psychoanalyst, talked about inferiority complex and superiority complex, in a way that's another way to think about high-low social status, or another more psychological rather than interpersonal, interactive way. But anyway, so this high-low social status thing also maps to some degree on the actual class dynamic and sociology of fascism. And in other words, that they are also often, the base of fascism also comes from some kind of a middle class, petty bourgeoisie, people who have something but not a lot, but who are have anxious anxieties about their status, and anxieties about what might happen if things change in society, if something, and now fascism emerged at a time when there was actual potential for a change in terms of communist revolution in what happened in Russia, and so forth and so on. And there was a fear of the workers' movements of the early 20th century and mid 20th century, and so by these people who had some success, or in the social terms of their society, they owned something, they owned property, but they maybe weren't big industrialists, so forth and so on. And this is so this middle status of being both little but also wanting to be big, and wanting to be high, being in the middle, or maybe being low but wanting to be high. So these are people who are conventionally also very concerned about social status, and are very concerned about where they fit in, and very concerned about appearances, so forth and so on. So anyway, this so there is a reality basis to this high-low confusion, in a way, and also attaching themselves to a figure that they consider to be high status, very, very high status, and that person may not necessarily come from the traditional high status, the traditional upper class of the society. So, or though Trump is more so than, for instance, Adolf Hitler and Mussolini, in the sense of having been born into great wealth, so forth and so on, that he styles himself as being an outcast from that, or an outsider, and not so he is constantly playing with this idea that he is not, he is both extremely high status but also not at all, or just, or he's also relatable, he's also you know, and he also adopts in speaking and so on and so on the patois, the speaking style of a entertainer, really, someone who is trying to touch and you know, emotionally touch the audience that he has, and trying to relate to them and trying to make them feel comfortable and being a host to them. So he acts that out often in his long rambling speeches. So anyway, so this Trump is playing often with the high-low status paradox, and is also unbalances his political opponents by being both high and low, by adopting attitudes, by adopting ideas, for instance, from the left, and then, you know, destabilizing his more conventional opponents who are taken off guard by this. And also, you know, his most conventional opponents see themselves as part of a more conventional pyramid of a hierarchy, where that kind of a mixing of different styles and so forth and so on is very destabilizing for them. They're trying to protect interests, as is Trump, in a different way. So, but there are sort of two groups of performers competing for the donations, among other things, from wealthy people and so forth and so on, but also votes from the public. So a politician in our society, in the United States, we're now focusing more on the United States political system, they have to both attract these donors and then also attract voters. So there is already kind of a little bit of a high-low paradox for many politicians in a society that is a political system that is structured such that, I mean, there are politicians who voluntarily you know, give up or don't accept large donations or donations from corporate PACs and so forth and so on, but that's a personal choice, and it's not regulated by the political system that they have to do that. So, but most politicians do not do that. And I mean, there's a growing group that does, and that's great. But anyway, so this high-low exists within the job of the politician in the United States. They are facing both of these audiences in a way, and both of these groups, one of which is very, very high status and also wealthy, and, you know, the ruling class essentially of the United States, and the other is the electorate, which is a mixed group, but they're considered to be ordinary people and so forth and so on. And you know, many of those people think of themselves as not being, you know, whatever high status, so forth and so on, and they're ordinary people doing, you know, in their daily lives, so forth and so on. So anyway, but this ability to play with that status and to sort of to act it out is something that is a hard thing for the conventional politician to deal with. And then also, so this is also not accidental for the ruling class, for the donor class, the capitalist class in the United States, in that they are a small minority, or the big capitalists, and even if we include even smaller owners of smaller businesses, so forth and so on, it's still not a huge group. But let's say the people who are the, you know, really powerful people, they're a very, very small minority, less than 1% of the population, and they can't politically function without politicians that are either separate out this game of like appealing to their donor interests and then also appealing to the electorate, or who sort of mix it up a little bit and act as if they are, for instance, overthrowing a corrupt system. So this is where fascism borrows from the communism or the Marxism communism that it was invented in some sense to combat. So they are acting as if they are revolutionaries in a way, at the same time as that they are upholding the social order, that they are the revolutionaries that will maintain the status quo. And so, you know, in terms of the if we analyze Marxism, socialism, you know, revolutionary communism, whatever, which right now is a, you know, not very big movement, and there's not really many people who are advocating for it. It's more of an illusion, and a delusion of the right that's trying to, you know, pin that on the Democrats. It's not like it was in the middle of the 20th century or the early 20th century, where there was, you know, large revolutionary workers movements and parties that were attempting to seize power, and the idea of what became Soviet communism was considered to be a positive development by a certain sector of the population, and unfortunately that didn't work out so well. You know, in many different respects, there were some important ideas in it, but it you know, I have a ongoing critique of Marxism that I'm working on, and so forth and so on, that is important, I think, because people need to liberate themselves from that particular mindset, even if they want to radically change society for the better, more egalitarian society, a socialistic society. There are dead weights of history that need to be thrown off, in my opinion, and intellectually, and also in terms of political action. But anyway, end of parentheses there. The or to analyze in terms of this low-high status thing, is that the idea in Marx's theory and communism and so forth and so on was that the working people, the peasants plus the working people, so it became, because Marxist parties or Marxist-Leninist parties became more powerful in mostly rural societies, you know, where there were a lot of landless or, you know, smallholder peasants, so forth and so on, that lived in rural areas. That anyway, so a worker peasant movement would, you know, speak sort of the people who have, or quote unquote, low social status, would, you know, overthrow this order, this hierarchical order, through, in the way that Lenin conceived of the revolution, so forth and so on, through this party, through that was supposedly a democratic centralist party. They never achieved that, but anyway, but that was the idea that it was expressing the will of the people through this party. So, and it would basically level old social hierarchies and old status distinctions, and it would create an egalitarian society. But coming from the people who were of traditionally, conventionally, in capitalist or in feudal societies of low social status, and so in that society, as conceived, as most people would agree, even though the idea was that you were overthrowing these hierarchies, and that the idea of a revolution is that everyone is equal, and then the idea of social status itself, you know, is considered to be old-fashioned and you know, obsolete. But even though within that party, within that system, there were people who, then there were social hierarchies that developed within the Soviet system, and so they were different. They were but anyway, and they were untheorized by Marxism, Marxism-Leninism, and that kind of got out of control for in many different ways in many of those societies. Not in some worse than others, and some they were more successful in industrializing and in raising the living standards of people in very, very poor societies and in industrializing them in terms of their own goal setting, that they were, somewhat successful in doing some of those things. But anyway, fascism is adopting this idea of an overthrow and of a revolution and a new and throwing out, but then to reinforce the old system. So it's a way to play this fence, or to try to steal some of the appeal of communism and Marxism, but join it to a nationalistic, chauvinistic project, and that's about reinforcing hierarchies and keeping the ruling class in power in some ways. And so, and this was a, depending on which society and which leader we're talking about, and so forth and so on, and which political movement, there was relative accommodation of the old hierarchies and different. Most the preference is always to maintain the hierarchy. That's the point in a way. So this high-low status thing is very important for, in general, the confusion is part of the ploy, okay, and so, but it's not ultimately it's not a stable political system. It's one that implodes very quickly, or in some countries it lasted a long time when it was allied with the military, and it grew out of the military, in Spain, for instance, so forth and so on. But was less imperialistic than the German fascism, and therefore, which created great instability and eventually a war, which they were militarily defeated. This solution, anyway, is one of desperation for the ruling class. So the ruling class is not super pumped, okay, about relying on fascism and fascists to do their dirty work, so to speak, and they prefer a system where they're dealing with the more of a traditional array of social statuses, and also ways in which their role is in a way hidden from the public, because to maintain a democratic system. So another assumption here is that fascism is a scourge generally of democracy, and of the problem in a capitalist democracy of a system that's going out of control, where there's extreme hierarchy, extreme inequality, and the devastation of society, the devastation of natural environments, so forth and so on, and so there's a crisis. And so to solve the political crisis, there are a number of different ways to do it, and one of them is for the ruling class is to go with fascists, who are going to create this illusion of being a popular movement, of being a low-high social status movement, of creating a mass movement of people who support essentially traditional hierarchies, and they do it by fueling racism and so forth and so on, and nationalism, but it's an attempt to solve a crisis. So anyway, so I think maybe listening to this, some of this is sort of stating the obvious, but it's the obvious that has gone, let's say, out of our parlance, common parlance, about fascism, and I'm trying to contextualize it historically and also its uses. And I think this high-low social status, what I'm calling a paradox, is an interesting window into it, okay? And so you can see what's going on, and you can, in a way, predict, or you have a better sense of how to predict the political actions of fascists and neo-fascists, so forth and so on, in society, and which forces are interested in them and trying to boost them, so forth and so on, and also how to productively combat them and create a better society, a better democracy. But anyway, so I will stop here, and please share your thoughts in the comments below. Please like the video if you got anything out of it, and please subscribe to Politics 2100 for notices of new videos. See you soon.